always being about him. Me.
Crema.
I'm running the show today, and I'm going to be talking you through some hot Battlefield 5 news. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm getting withdrawals already. I really enjoyed the alpha, of course, who didn't? But also, the direction that the game is taking, and I can't wait to sink my teeth into that Battlefield 5 pie once again. That being said, the alpha was a way for DICE to not only test the gameplay of Battlefield 5, but also the technical side of the game too. Obviously, not everything was perfect with the alpha, we know that. There are always things that can be improved upon and changed. But it's amazing to see that DICE are opening a channel with the community to let them know that they hear us loud and clear. And to prove this, they've recently put together a very long blog post, detailing a ton of information about the alpha, what it means, and what they've already changed going forward. So let's take a look, break it all down, and discuss the consequences. Before we get into the gameplay side of things, let's first touch on that juicy back end. Oh, cheeky. While it sounds pretty boring, for example, how easily you get into the game, as well as the amount of time you're kept waiting, it's actually really important for the overall game experience. We all know that during the alpha there were some big issues when you're trying to stay in a squad, especially if you joined in a party. Even being able to join the squad once you were in the game was a bit hit and miss. This, of course, was not ideal for such a team-based game, but DICE said it will be fixed, and it was simply a bug that couldn't be fully addressed during the course of the alpha. We have to kind of take this with a pinch of salt, I feel, because the squad system and party system has been pretty dreadful since Battlefield 3. And honestly, it's not really improved much all the way up to Battlefield 1. Sometimes it simply just doesn't work. So, fingers crossed that DICE are going to make fixing that new system a top priority. One thing I didn't have in the alpha though, was any crashes. I'm not sure if anybody else observed any, but on my setup at least, I don't remember having any issues in that respect. Which, you know, it's quite nice, isn't it? When it comes to joining a game, DICE have acknowledged that there were still a few issues with matchmaking during the alpha. And as such, some players were either put on servers that weren't really suitable in terms of location and ping, or they simply got a matchmaking error. Of course, the server browser is often the best choice, but DICE are aware that the quick matchmaking needs a few tweaks to make it a bit more consistent. They say the entire system will see improvements before the game releases, but it's important to remember that there is a lot for the system to consider when matchmaking players. Skill level, latency, location. There's always a lot in play to ensure users get the best experience. And there are always going to be a few times where it doesn't get it quite right. I personally wouldn't mind having a slightly longer wait time if it meant getting into the best server. One thing that I find particularly frustrating in Battlefield 1 is when you use the quick match and you get placed into an empty server. It happens all the time, and I do think that part of that is perhaps due to the lower player count now compared to launch, but I would rather wait a few more minutes than be put into an empty server. Or, of course, I could use a server browser, which I would say I use 90% of the time anyway. Okay, so moving on to the good stuff. The gameplay. The meat and gravy. The veg. What have DICE said they've already changed based on the data and the feedback from the BF5 closed alpha? Well, I think it's worth pointing out the obvious first. The alpha was just a small taste, a nibble, of what the whole smorgasbord of a game will have to offer. So it's going to be relatively hard to fully gauge balance and such, because the final game will have way more weapons, gadgets, grenades, vehicles, etc. That being said, there are still certain things that you can pick up that perhaps need looking at, and DICE have done just that. Let's take revives for instance. In the alpha, the revives, especially squad revives, were considered too long by a lot of people. The main problem, if you want to call it that, is that you are very exposed when reviving a player in Battlefield 5, and the animation to revive takes a long time. Especially when it's a squad revive, and it feels like an eternity. And so DICE have taken that feedback and decided to reduce the time it takes to revive by 2.5 seconds to be specific. They have also said that the system will feel less clunky as they improve it, and they are aware of a problem where players couldn't initiate a revive, or the revive icon tended to be delayed. Also, music to my ears, the delay at the end of the revive, where you couldn't move your mouse or anything for a second, will be removed as well. I think that alone will make the revive system feel way better and snappier. If the standard revive needs looking at, well, that can be done down the line, but for now it's just the buddy revive that's had its animation time reduced. I seem to recall DICE saying in previous interviews that you'll be able to cancel the revive animations eventually, so 2 thumbs up on that one. What about ammo then? I know that was a really big topic during the alpha. There is a big change up for Battlefield 5, and not only do you start the round with a lot less ammo, but you really have to work with your teammates, or utilise the supply stations around the map to restock. It seems that for the most part, DICE are relatively happy with how the system worked. Attrition, they call it. And I can't say I disagree. So, although DICE may tweak some of the ammo numbers for specific weapons, the system will remain how it was in the alpha, but can be looked at and changed in the future if needed. One of the newest parts to Battlefield 5 is of course the reinforcement system. During the alpha, if your squad was doing well, the squad leader could call in either a V1 rocket or a massive tank. DICE have said that they did feel that the V1 rocket was perhaps a little too attainable in Conquest, and so it seems that will be looked at. Likely they'll scale how many points you need for that particular reinforcement. They also want to look at details like the blast radius, and how players can be better warned of an incoming rocket and potentially counter it. Perhaps being able to shoot it down? I didn't actually try that during the alpha, so I'm not sure if it was already possible. Could be a cool alternative, providing it took plenty of damage, or maybe even a kamikaze plane attack. After all, you've worked hard for it, and if it could be shot down every time, then what's the point? One part of the alpha that perhaps players couldn't agree on was the time to kill. Some players felt it was perfect, others felt they were dying too quickly, and then there were some that are still on the fence. Part of this is due to the fact that a lot of players were using the STG, which of course is ridiculously strong and basically god tier. And also let's not forget that due to the new attrition system, players are not always running around on full health. It's definitely something that DICE will have to look at and tweak if necessary. Interestingly, DICE said this: time to kill is not just determined by how powerful weapons are. For instance, it's also related to how fast the game lets you react to being fired at. They go on to say that they are looking at ways to help you assess a threat and better understand where it's coming from. Camera shake is also being adjusted, and they want to work on those elements first before they start altering weapon damage. But they've said they will resort to going down that route if that's what's required. In the blog, DICE also showed off a really cool heat map, pun intended, which showcased player locations on the alpha map, Arctic Fjord, on both Conquest and Grand Operations. Unsurprisingly, when playing Conquest, most of the action took place around the bridge and the surrounding areas. But these sort of heat maps give DICE so much data to work with. For instance, on Grand Operations, they can see where players are parachuting in, so they can see what areas of the map need more defence, or perhaps are too strong for the attacking team, depending on the map. Lastly, DICE touched on gameplay in the alpha. And of course, if you have played Battlefield 5, you will know that the game has gone down a very different route from Battlefield 1. Random bullet deviation and bullet spread was the order of the day in Battlefield 1, but Battlefield 5 has real recoil that you can see, control, and in turn master. And I personally think that for the most part, players, especially veterans, really appreciate this new direction. I personally love it, but maybe, let's bam that spice pig up another notch. Perhaps a little bit more recoil could be introduced on some of the harder hitting assault rifles. STG. STG. They have mentioned that they're going to keep an eye on single fire, which I do think is good because some weapons were perhaps too good at range when it comes to utilising single fire. But as long as they're watching it, I'm fine with that. Of course, during the alpha, we only had a handful of weapons to choose from, so players you were encountering often had the same weapon as you. When the game actually releases, there will be a bigger variance in the weapons across the battlefield. So hopefully, you may often come up against players where you have an advantage in terms of weaponry or distance, but then on the flip side, perhaps a disadvantage at times also. The idea, of course, is for different weapons to be valid in certain situations, rather than having one weapon that does it all. A jack-of-all-trades style weapon that's good in every scenario is simply just not good for gameplay. There will apparently be a lot more tests of the game before launch, both internal and external. I don't think anybody would be surprised if we see a closed beta, and DICE have already confirmed there will be an open beta in September, so we've got that to look forward to. I think it's great to see DICE opening up and talking to the community about how they felt a test went, but also letting us know what they intend to change. Transparency and regular communication is key in modern multiplayer games. I think overall the alpha was pretty good, and players will be really happy to see the revive animation sped up a little bit. I for one am extremely grateful the delay at the end of the revive animation is being dealt with, because I found that just so frustrating. So that's all for today. Thank you so much for watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video.